Welcome to Arise with Christ. We share stories and truths related to the temple. Together with you, our hope is to fortify faith in Jesus Christ and experience joy in covenant keeping.
I'm Carolee Bailey, and I'm here with Angie Plojek. Thank you for being here as a listener of Arise with Christ. We really appreciate you spending this time with us.
Carolee, we love making this podcast so much, don't we?
Yes, we do.
It is fulfilling and uplifting to us as we spend time with our amazing guests. We hope that you enjoy listening. Can you think of anyone else who might enjoy listening as well? We would be really grateful if you would share this episode with them, if so.
We would also love it if you could follow the show and leave us a review. This will help others to find us. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation with Courtney Russell. It always lifts my spirits to visit with Courtney, and I end our conversations better than I was at the beginning.
In this episode, Courtney shares how the Lord prepared her to receive the gospel and gave her that opportunity when she was ready. As a single mom, she embraced the gospel and soon after married Tom Russell, whose wife Angie had passed away following a battle with cancer. Angie's passing came as Tom was filming Mr. Dunk Beetle, a film that she insisted that he finish. Courtney references this film and why it is so significant in their story.
Courtney and Tom's example of thoughtfully and intentionally blending their family exemplifies Christ-like attributes. It's evident in talking to Courtney that it is the gospel of Jesus Christ and family relationships that matter most.
Some of you may remember that Tom Russell was on episode 25 a few weeks ago. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, we encourage you to do so. We know you will enjoy it, and it is a great companion to this episode. Courtney Russell is from Bakersfield, California. She is wife to Tom, mother to Spencer, Rebecca, Isaac, Jared, and Taylor, and grandma to 6 of the greatest kids on the planet. She is a convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints of almost 18 years. She loves gospel education, family history, and temple work, and strives to be a seeker of the Savior in every place, circumstance, and person that she encounters. Her current calling is co-teaching the 14 and 15-year-old Sunday school class with Tom. Courtney enjoyed a 16-year career in advertising before marrying Tom and moving to Utah, and has spent the last 17 years producing film and television projects and teaching film production management and faculty-mentored productions at Brigham Young University. Her resume prior to that includes things like antiques dealer, realtor, phase contrast microscopist, a variety of retail jobs, and what she describes as just about every restaurant position known to man.
Courtney, thank you so much for being with us today and letting us be in your home to visit with you.
Thank you for inviting me.
This is a treat, and it's going to be really fun for us. You know, it wasn't long ago that we were here talking to Tom.
I know.
And we just feel like you guys are so kind to give us more of your time, and we appreciate you so much.
No, you are so sweet to ask.
I would love to hear about your early experiences with faith and with Jesus Christ. And what did you know and believe as a young person, and then growing up, and then through those years as a single mom? What was that like?
So my mom likes to say for my route in life, I chose the scenic route, which is very true. So when I was a little girl, actually all the way up until the end of my high school years, I always went to church with my family. We went to the congregational church. I was a member. I was in the choir. I participated. I was in the bell choir, did all the things. And my congregational church, the one I went to, was part of the United Church of Christ, that denomination or that branch of Protestantism. And so I was really active in church. I knew who Jesus was. I believed in God. I believed in Jesus. I had a couple of significant experiences, mostly as a teenager. We used to go to a church camp called Pilgrim Pines. I love that place. It's a place in California where young people from all the different congregations that were part of this, we would call it an area, basically the area, would come up for these summer camps. And they were a week or 2 weeks, or you could be a counselor for the junior camps or whatever. There were a variety of different options. When I was a sophomore, I became secretary to that council. So I was involved in planning some of these youth camps. And then by the time I was a senior, I was the moderator and did that. But as soon as I graduated high school and left, I basically just stopped. Now, when I was a young person, I went to a Baptist junior high, a Catholic high school. I attended other churches with friends of mine, Presbyterian church. I would go to their youth group sometimes. So I had experience with kind of a broad spectrum of different things. My dad at one point attended an Episcopal church and a Lutheran church. So I was married in a Lutheran church the first time. So I had other experiences. When I graduated high school, I just kind of stopped going. I didn't stop believing ever. It was just like I had other things to do. I was interested in other things. Then when Jared came along, he went to a Christian preschool. And that was always really important to me, was making sure that if they had to go to daycare or preschool, that it was in a Christian environment. And so with both of the kids, there was that experience. And then in 1999, I was in a really bad car accident. It would have probably been 6 months to a year later. The missionaries knocked on my door. And I started taking the discussions then. Sorry. Waterworks, I can't control it. So I started taking the discussions then and went through all the discussions, but I never went to church that time. And eventually they started asking me about baptism. And I just was not in a place, like, mentally, emotionally. It was just like too big of a lifestyle change for me, too much after everything else that I was also dealing with. And frankly, I think I was too selfish. I just wasn't ready. That was my first experience with the missionaries. And I never this was back in the days of the pastel pamphlets. Do you remember those?
Yes, I handed those out.
So yeah, this was like 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. But I never got rid of those. And I never got rid of my Book of Mormon. I never read my Book of Mormon all the way through. I mean, I read here and there and when the missionaries were there. But I just did not give it the effort, right, at that time.
Courtney, you may not have given it the effort at that time, but you later had another opportunity to be taught by the missionaries, and your connection to Tom was instrumental in leading you to reconnecting with missionaries years later. Will you just share with us how you first met Tom and then how you did eventually have that experience of being taught by the missionaries again?
I met Tom for the first time when he was working with my mom. They worked together at an advertising agency, and I had always admired him. He's so creative. And I remember the first time I had a conversation with him at the office. He was married to Angie and had 2 kids, and I think Isaac was on the way. But I remember having a conversation with him. We were talking about some commercials. He just comes up with ideas out of nowhere instantaneously, and he's still that way. Anyway, so I always admired his creativity. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I was married the first time in 1992, and he and Angie and his family, Isaac was brand new. He would have been born January of 92, and that was in June. So he was a little guy. And they came to our wedding reception. And for whatever reason, one day we were talking about this, and Tom said, we were not there. And I had found my guest book, and it was signed, and Angie had signed it. And so I was sure that they had been there. A lot of people from my mom's work came to that. And then, I don't know, a few summers later, we were at my mom's house watching old home movies and came across one of my wedding reception. And there he is sitting there with Angie and his kids. And he still has no recollection of that at all. Anyway, there's a friend we have in common named Bill Nelson. Tom, in the summer of 2005, made a film. And Bill Nelson was the lead in that film. But he lived in Bakersfield, which is where I lived, and Tom was living in Utah. And Bill had been telling me about this movie, and I knew Tom, and so I thought it was going to be fantastic. Anyway, he'd been keeping me up to speed on what was happening with the film after it was made. And it was showing in Utah that fall. And I mean, there was no way I could go. I was a single mom by that point. And then it got into a festival in Mendocino the following May. It was going to be showing the following May. And I thought, that's, just a few hours drive. That would be really easy for me. So Bill had kind of kept me in the loop on all this. And the person who was supposed to pick Tom up at the airport in Oakland to drive him the rest of the way to Mendocino they ended up on a different flight to a different airport. So Bill called me and said, hey, would you be able to pick up Tom on your way from Bakersfield? I said, sure, no problem. So that was the first time I talked to Tom, was coordinating arrangements to pick him up at the airport. And so I did. I stopped and got him. And then we had a 3-hour conversation on the way up to Mendocino. And then while we were at the festival that weekend, everybody that was there associated with the film, they were all married. And me and Tom, who were both single. So we just kind of hung around together that whole weekend, which was great. It was a great opportunity for us to talk to each other and get to know each other.
I remember one night in particular, we were in my hotel room. Don't ask me why or where the wives were. I have no idea. I don't remember the circumstances of this, but it was me and Tom and Clay and Shannon Rock. And we were sitting in my hotel room and we were watching a basketball game. Okay, Tom will tell you, I love watching sports. Basketball, occasionally. I get sick of basketball really fast. But we're watching some basketball game. And this is after having, I think, 2 days with all of these people. And we were having this conversation, and I remember it distinctly because Shannon Rock, who is the church's greatest missionary, bar none, just so you know, Shannon Rock. Shannon has got the craziest stories, life stories, of anybody I've ever heard in my entire life. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, we weren't talking about anything significant, but it's the best conversation I've had in as long as I can remember. And I remember feeling so, just having this really great feeling. And a couple days later, when I was talking with Tom, I mentioned something about that. And he said, oh, that's really interesting. And then we continued the conversation. And in the course of the conversation, I found out that everybody that we had been spending time with were all members of the church. And I didn't know that at the time. And that was when it kind of all clicked for me. Like, oh, I recognize this feeling. And that's what it was. So I asked Tom, hey, tell me more about this church. I told him that I had talked to the missionaries before. And he said, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and direct you to Shannon Rock. He'll be able to tell you more about the church. And so he did. And it turned out that Shannon was the ward mission leader in the ward that I would have been in if I were a member. Oh. So that was kind of how the second set of discussions began, was because of that. And during the course of this time, Tom and I were continuing our conversations and kind of exploring what a relationship might look like. And he was in Utah and I was in California, and it was complicated. And then my company hired Tom to do a documentary for the Department of Human Services. I was in advertising at the time. And so I had done millions of commercials and some long form corporate documentary, but I mean corporate videos, but never a documentary film. So we hired Tom. Tom came out and we spent that summer shooting the film. And then I came back to Utah for the editing. We worked on the editing together. That would have been July. And then in August is when I decided that I was going to be baptized. And Tom baptized me. Spencer spoke. It was a remarkable day. And remembering it now, like I woke up that morning just so happy. And I just, like, now could not stop crying all day long. I can't really describe the feeling because I was 38 at the time. And I mentioned the scenic route. I had lived a lot of life in that 38 years, made some decisions that I wholly regret. And just was not living in a way that I knew was the right way to be living. And so knowing that we have this opportunity to be baptized and have all of that washed away, forgiven, was so deeply meaningful to me and so deeply important to me. It was the first time in my whole life that I ever really felt like, oh, I can actually be a new person. And it was super, there aren't really words to describe it. It was incredible. So that was my baptism. And then I was confirmed the next day in church. That was also a really incredible experience. And Tom's dad participated with that. And his brother was my stake president at the time. So it was kind of a family affair.
I really love hearing your story and how mindful Jesus Christ was of you throughout your entire life.
Yep.
And through all of your experience. It's so apparent, that first time you were meeting with the missionaries, and it's totally understandable that you couldn't make that life change at that point.
Yeah, I was certainly not ready. And I think if I had, the rest of my story would be so different.
Yeah.
So I'm actually really grateful I didn't join the church then.
It's beautiful to be able to look back on that and appreciate that.
Yeah. Another kind of interesting side note on that. That was back when the missionaries showed up. I later thought, they just were knocking doors, and they happened to knock on my door. I found out that Tom's cousin's wife, who was a client of mine, she was actually the one who sent the missionaries to my house after my accident because she thought, she could really use this right now.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, I didn't find that out until our wedding reception.
So many connections. That's so interesting.
Weird, isn't it?
It's awesome.
It sounds divinely orchestrated.
I think my whole life has been, and we don't ever notice it, I don't think, or we often don't notice it in the moment. But I can pinpoint specific experiences where clearly the Lord was tapping me on the shoulder going, don't do that. Or, oh no, go a different way. Or don't, careful of that person. Or what are you thinking? Or whatever. And so again, in retrospect, I can see all of these times where I just kind of ignored it as opposed to not recognizing it at all, right? And I think the key now is when those things happen, not ignore, recognizing it, acknowledging it, and doing something about it instead of. So even when I'm being corrected now, it's a prayer of gratitude in the moment saying, oh, thank you, saving me from myself again.
I think it's interesting, Courtney, too, that you joined the church at 38 years old. I was baptized when I was 8. And you describing that experience of learning to recognize those taps on the shoulder is exactly what I experienced too. We all have to come to that understanding and recognizing the Spirit guiding us in our lives.
Right. And it feels different. Like it's not the same every time. And it comes in unexpected ways sometimes. And it takes a lifetime, I'm sure. I mean, we're still learning today of recognizing. I'm thinking of a particular instance. A couple of months ago, I was feeling very angry with somebody. I woke up this particular day and I was just super frustrated with the circumstances and what was happening. I was really angry. And all of a sudden, it was just like this thought, you can do something about that. And I wasn't doing it to make myself feel better. And I had to be really mindful of that because sometimes it's like, hey, guess what I'm doing for you?
Yeah.
But it wasn't that at all. It was so that she could feel some relief. And it changed everything for me that day.
That's so true. And it's so real life. So often I don't listen to that nudge. Like, here's what you could do to make it better. But when we do, it's just beautiful that our Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ care about those little things. They know that those things are going to make a difference.
Right. Well, and I think that idea, he promises us, Christ promises us that his yoke is easy and his burden is light, and that he can shoulder some of that with us. And it seems sort of counterintuitive to like add another thing to your agenda for a day, but that's how he does it. It's like, I don't know how it all works. I just know that when we are serving others, whether it's, someone in our own family or outside of there, just that tiny little extra bit of effort on our part lifts so much from us. It takes, I don't know, the actual burden. I describe it to Tom as a backpack. I constantly am taking off my backpack and saying, here it is, Jesus. I'm giving this to you. And then 5 minutes later, I'm walking out the door with that stupid backpack back on.
How did I pick that up again?
Thinking about whatever it was that was stressing me out again. And it's like, I went through like 2 days in a row, like 2 weeks ago, of just every time I'd get it out of my head, it was right back in my head again. And it was making me crazy because I was recognizing that. And I was thinking, how do I do this? So I opened Family Search and figure out what temple work I'm going to do that week. And suddenly I'm not thinking about anybody other than these other people who have been waiting for me to get off my behind and do something. And that was it. I just had to figure out a way to get something else in my head that mattered more.
I love how you said that. Get something else in your head that matters more. And I think maybe the way our prophet would say that is to think celestial.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. I was thinking about you and thinking about talking to you, and President Nelson's talk, The Power of Spiritual Momentum, came to my mind. And one of his suggestions that he gives is to learn about God and how he works. And that's what you've been talking about right now.
Yeah.
Is your experience of learning about God and how he works. And I just really like this little part from his talk. He says, one of our greatest challenges today is distinguishing between the truths of God and the counterfeits of Satan. That is why the Lord warned us to pray always, that we may conquer Satan and escape the hands of the servants of Satan that do uphold his work. And then he goes on to say, with frightening speed, a testimony that is not nourished daily by the good word of God can crumble. Thus, the antidote to Satan's scheme is clear. We need daily experiences worshiping the Lord and studying his gospel. I plead with you to let God prevail in your life.
That is so true. As you were talking, I was thinking about the thing that confuses us the most, I think, or that gets in our way most frequently is pride. And when I think of pride, I sort of, I think of arrogant people or whatever. Pride is it's whatever gets between you and God. And when you worry about how something is going to affect you more than how what you do is in alignment with the will of the Lord, everything's out of whack. Everything is harder. That's the counterfeit. The counterfeit is, I need to mop my floors, so I'll do my scripture study later. The counterfeit is, I'm right, and I need to make sure that they understand that I'm actually right about this thing. Does it matter? No, it does not matter in the tiniest little bit. And for myself in particular, I'm constantly getting in my own way because I worry, I get pharisaical. Are my steps in the right order? Am I taking, the right number of them today? Or, gosh, I have to do all of these things. And balance is what seems to suffer in my experience. And I've kind of come to know that if I don't start my day with prayer, if I don't start my day with scripture study, come follow me in particular, and I do it differently than Tom does it. I have to do small sections at a time. And if I do it on an electronic device, it doesn't stick in my head. I have to look at the actual scriptures in the book. If those two things don't happen before everything else, the whole day is upside down for me. And some days that looks like 5 minutes because I slept in too late or I got distracted. I can't open my email first because then work starts for me. So anyway, but this pride takes so many forms, and getting to know God can only happen if you're constantly surrendering to him. You're constantly surrendering to his will, his instruction, his guidance. And when it's silent, when you're feeling those things or hearing those things, you still know what they are. You've heard them before. Go back to something you've heard before and remember that thing and do that thing. And eventually you'll start getting instruction for the present time. I think another piece of pride is when you feel like God is silent or you aren't receiving the answers you were hoping to receive or getting the direction that you're accustomed to feeling or those taps on the shoulders or whatever. It's not abandoning what you've known the whole time. I think pride steps in and says, oh, you're not going to talk to me? Well, then I'm not going to talk to you. Or then I'm just going to try to figure it out on my own, or whatever it is. We stamp our foot like a 2-year-old and go storming off. It's being willing to say, okay, maybe there's a reason for the silence. And maybe it's not that he's mad at me, or that, he doesn't have anything to say to me, or maybe there's something going on somewhere else that requires more attention, or he's working on my problem. It's just not in the way that I think he should be working on my problem, or whatever. So many times I have found answers to my questions, or solutions to problems, or answers to prayer in places that seemingly had nothing to do with what was going on in the moment. I mentioned earlier how we were talking about Angie and how things are kind of divinely orchestrated. Before Angie died, she told Tom she wanted him to remarry. And he was like, he probably told you this. He just was like, do not talk to me about this. That will never happen. And I think he said to her something along the lines of, well, I'm just never going to be happy again. And Angie said, oh, come on, just get over it, basically. But she also told Tom's mom that she wanted him to get married again. And I think that was a really important thing for her to say. Shortly after that, Tom said, well, we're just not going to make the movie. We're going to stop it, because she got her final diagnosis, basically, where they told her that there was nothing else they could do, about a couple of weeks before they were supposed to start filming. And Tom said, we just won't do it. And Angie said, you're absolutely going to do it. You have to do it. She insisted that he do it. And they had one night off in the shooting of that film. They started in June and went through, and it was the 4th of July. And she passed away that night. And that summer, the kids were up on the film set, and they showed up every day, and they had, they were participating and stuff. And at the end of that summer, Isaac told Tom it was the best summer he'd ever had. And it was interesting that it was the summer that Angie passed away. And it was Angie's genius to say, have the forethought to say, you guys can either be sitting around here looking at me, wringing your hands, or you can be occupied in a different way, doing something really important. And that film was important for the kids. But that film is the reason that Tom and I are married right now. And so I think she knew it had a purpose. And the film itself is, the main character is a Christ figure throughout. The message of that film is so important. So people who have, no interaction with us at all can experience something as a result of that film being out there. So she was really wise in that way, whether or not she knew all the things that would come of it. And I think Tom, our relationship was really hard for him, I think. And for me, it was heaven sent and so easy. For him, I can't imagine having a perfect marriage for 20 years and then even thinking about there ever being another person in your life. Like, that doesn't compute for me. So as our relationship developed, it was probably super confusing, and also really like, how do you reconcile that experience? Like, I had this perfect thing. Am I betraying that somehow, or am I, what is that? What does that look like? But Angie has always, what's the word I'm looking for? Helped confirm decisions along the way. And I say Angie, I'm sure she was involved in this. It was definitely the Lord, guiding. But it's what I was saying earlier. I think sometimes you make decisions and you aren't entirely sure, but you feel like, okay, I'll just take a step in that direction, and then one step will lead to another and to another. And usually, pretty quickly, oh, nope, wrong road. A couple steps back, go a different way. And I think I'm sharing this cautiously, but it was important. It was certainly important for Tom, but it was really important for me too, because like I said, I thought, oh, this is a no-brainer for me, like this is, I'm totally clear. I didn't realize at the time that I needed a reassurance too. So Tom had a dream one night where he was holding hands with Angie and he was walking up a hill and I was standing at the top of the hill. And when he got there, Angie took his hand and put it in my hand. And then she kept walking on the other side of the hill. And for me, it was like, oh, that was so important because not only was she helping me understand that this was okay, but there was a responsibility that was coming along with it in these 3 children and in my 2 children that at the time I couldn't have imagined what that meant, you know? But it was so important. And so anyway, I'm sorry, I'm talking in circles, I think now, but I think the Lord, he helps us if we let him, even when we don't know we need the help sometimes.
It's so inspiring to me, Courtney, how generous you are and willing to speak about Angie and her role in bringing, her role in helping the Lord bring you and Tom together, and just the love that you can feel in this room within that relationship. I can't imagine that is always easy, but it speaks a lot to you, I think, as a woman, being able to embrace that. Yeah. I'm not saying that right, but do you know what I mean?
I sure do. And she has always been, this has been so important to me from the moment Tom and I considered having a relationship. There is no way I could ever replace her. And if I ever thought in those terms, everything falls apart. And I met Angie. I mean, I knew her early on, and I knew just Tom and Angie were like the model couple. Everybody wants a relationship like Tom and Angie had. And so as we contemplated a relationship, and I looked at what that looked like, this is again kind of this surrender idea. You have to surrender your ego. You have to surrender your preconceived ideas. You have to see it, I guess, for what it is, which is something new and different, integrated and separate. So Angie, the biggest mistake you can make is try to pretend that there was no Angie, or make other people feel like they have to pretend there was no Angie. Absolutely nothing good can come from that. And the beautiful example and foundation that she laid, without it, Tom isn't Tom. Without it, the kids aren't the kids. It's fundamental to who they are as human beings. And she set a bar over 20 years that says to Courtney, you better come in and don't start from scratch again. Like, you've got to start right where they are. We talked about it pretty extensively. And I said, I don't ever want the kids to feel like they can't talk about their mom or think about their mom, or that they suddenly have to pretend like she didn't exist. Like, I never wanted that. So before we got married, I was here, and I think Spencer had left on his mission by that point. But this wall down this hallway, we took family pictures from me and family pictures from Tom and the kids and everything. And we made down the hallway, we just put up all of our pictures together so that she was constantly present visibly while we were making this transition. And that was so helpful, because every time I walked down the hall, I was reminded that I had work to do. Like, there's still work to be done. Isaac was 14. Becca was 17 and moved out. Spencer was on his mission. He was 19. So that visual reminder helped us transition as a family and to become a family rather quickly, I think. And circumstances were such that we got married in November, and my kids were still in school in California. Tom's kids were in school here. And so I would come and live here for 2 weeks, and then I would go back to California for 2 weeks and be with my kids. And we did that from November to June, May, I guess it was, end of May. And then I moved here in May, and my kids stayed with their dad for the summer. So it gave Isaac and Becca a chance to get to know me 2 weeks at a time. And then when I was here for the summer, they were ready for me to be here without my kids, which was good because it gave them a couple of months for us to get to know each other on a day-to-day basis and sort of sort out, what it was going to be like. And then my kids came in at the end of August and were here, and they would go back to their dads on holidays and different things. But so as a family, the timing of all of it, we got married a year and a few months after Angie passed away. So that's relatively quick. Especially I would think for Tom's kids. But it kind of, the circumstances, again, divinely orchestrated, I think, gave us a chance to become a family little by little and kind of get to know each other in a unique way so that by the time we were all here full time, we were kind of better prepared, maybe is the best way to say it.
Well, we love you, and it's so admirable and beautiful to see how you have become a family.
Thank you.
I love it. Relating back to the covenant path, we talked about your baptism and then the role that your previous experience with God played in that and helped prepare you. Will you tell us about your journey on the covenant path from the time that you were baptized and married Tom and what it looked like when you went to the temple and received your endowment and then were sealed?
Yeah. So again, I was baptized in August and we were married in November. And so my home ward was still in California. And I mentioned that Tom's brother was my stake president. Tom's parents were in my ward, and his cousin and his cousin's wife and Shannon Rock. They were so helpful in terms of helping me understand, like when you join the church, especially as an adult, there are a lot of things that were totally unfamiliar to me in terms of like what church service looked like, especially. And so they were great. I was attending the new member lessons, and I can remember my new member teachers were great. I always had a lot of questions, and I would kind of come away from them sometimes not fully maybe understanding or grasping some of the concepts that they were trying to teach because this is a whole new vocabulary. And like when you say this, it means this, or there was just a lot that I didn't quite understand. So Tom's parents and Tom was teaching gospel doctrine here at the time. So I would usually kind of walk away from Sunday mornings with questions about things. And they were so great with helping me understand. And then, so I would be there for 2 weeks and I would come here for 2 weeks and be in gospel doctrine with Tom. And it was so helpful for me. And being married to somebody who's teaching those things in particular was extremely helpful because for me anyway, there was just like this huge learning curve, stuff that I had always accepted and thought I believed, that I realized, oh, these weren't doctrinal things. These were just things that I felt in my heart, like families being together forever afterward. I just always thought that, but didn't realize doctrinally in the church I was raised in, that wasn't a doctrine of that church. It was just something that I felt. So it was nice to kind of be able to start differentiating, what are personal feelings, what are doctrine, what does it all mean? And then in terms of progression along the covenant path, I would go do baptisms for the dead. I remember the first time I went to do baptisms, it was here. And I remember the person who was working at the baptistry, like I didn't know anything. And she said, so you have your own garments? And I said, I don't have any garments. I don't know. And she was just surprised. And I think she was surprised because at my age here, that's not, I don't think there are a lot of like middle-aged converts around here. I don't know. So that was a really unique experience. And my doing baptisms for the dead was just as powerful for me as my own. And I think probably because I'm the only member in my family, so I have a billion family names that need work or needed work. And I was starting with those that were closest to me. So that was a really important piece of connecting concepts for me. Like it was the experience of going to church, going to my classes, talking to people that I trusted, performing ordinances reading my scriptures, doing all of those things sort of combine to reassure me, to teach me, to encourage me, and to kind of expand my understanding exponentially. And I feel like, especially in those first couple of years, it was like just so much understanding and feeling super connected. And then over the last 15 years, not quite as rapidly as those first couple of years, but in powerful and very different ways. And as much from practicing and serving, and my service looks rather different right now than it did in those early days because of the nature of work and family and those sorts of things. But I feel like I'm serving particularly my students now. I find myself having opportunities to do things like bear my testimony, not in a traditional way, and to learn from and teach in different ways just based on my current circumstances. So I think the Lord provides opportunities for you to progress on the covenant path, regardless of what season of life you're in, whatever's happening in your life at any given moment. It doesn't always look traditional, for lack of a better way to say that. And so, I don't know, circling back to that idea of before, I think he communicates with you in ways that are personal to you and provides opportunities that are also personal to you. And it's just up to us to kind of recognize and decipher those as those. And often it's in retrospect. Oh, that's what that was an opportunity to bear your testimony. Oh, that's what that was. That was an opportunity to let me reinforce this principle of tithing, or, whatever the thing is. So that's sort of that. But I want to talk about my visiting teacher when I first came here. As I was preparing to be sealed in the temple, back then, people were very cautious about what they talked about outside the temple. I think we were still figuring out what we could and couldn't say. And so I spent a lot of my time with this look on my face, what? I am not exactly sure what you're saying. And Tom was the funniest of all, because he was very, he's just so careful about their very sacred things, and saying as much as he could say, and not really sure, but beyond a particular point. So when we were talking about garments in particular, there was it was just sort of this is, I'd obviously seen his. He couldn't talk about the garment itself, specifics about that. So I basically just sort of, and I was trying to envision what female garments looked like and could not, because whatever. So my visiting teacher at the time came over one day and she said, "Has anybody talked to you about garments?" And I said, "Yes, I know what they are. I know about them." But she said, "Have you ever, do you know what fabrics you like?" And so we're wandering into territory. I don't even know what you're talking about now. So she came over and she had I think she put them all in her temple bag. And she had different styles of tops and different styles of bottoms and different fabrics and all the different things. And she said, "So here's what they are." Showed them to me. And I could finally envision Tom was trying to describe the female sleeves, and I'm like, I don't even know what I was envisioning, these big long
T-shirt
elbow sleeves. Yeah. So that, oh my gosh, I can't even tell you what a tremendously helpful thing that was, to just know, okay, here's what I still didn't understand what they all symbolized, or what they meant specifically, but I could at least see what they were. She could explain to me how they're worn. All of that stuff was extraordinarily helpful for me. And then I figured I'll get the details later. That
yes,
helps me understand. And then when I went in for the fittings for the temple clothing, the lady who was working there was so helpful. She was just kind of explaining, here's how this is worn. And, when she took the measurement, she was just explaining kind of how they all worked, obviously without going through the whole thing. So that, for me, just having an understanding of the mechanics of it, the functionality was so helpful. And then when the blessings come and the instruction associated with them, you're not worrying about what way does this thing go or whatever. You can really focus on exactly what the intention is and what they mean and why they're important and sacred and all of those things. So that was really helpful. When we were sealed at the temple, that was a really busy day, and it's kind of a big blur to me right now. But that day, I received my endowment before we were sealed. So I did the initiatory, the endowment, and then straight into the sealing. So it was a lot of information, And I was really, trying to remember everything and all the things. It was really challenging. But we went to the temple the night before. We were sealed in Los Angeles temple. And we went the night before, and my kids had never been on temple grounds anywhere because they just hadn't. There wasn't one nearby, and I had never been to the temple other than in Utah. So we were there the night before, and Jared, they have apartments on the temple grounds. So we were staying there, and Jared at one point said to Tom, "Hey, can I talk to you? Can we go for a walk?" And Tom was like, "Sure." So he and Jared started walking around the temple. And Jared at one point was trying to describe how he was feeling inside. And he was kind of anxious. He had this, something was going on. And he said, "I feel this." He was trying to articulate it to Tom. And Tom said, "Oh, we're in a holy place." He said, "You're probably feeling," he was trying to kind of to describe the spirit and the sacred nature of the building itself and the grounds that surround it. And he was kind of scared. Jared was kind of scared. And Tom said, "There's nothing to be afraid of." And he kind of talked him through all of that stuff and came back and told me about it. And that was in my head when we went in the next morning to go through all the ordinances. And we had a couple of people from the ward in Utah had flown out. It was a really special day. And it was special to have old friends and family and new friends there. And important that our kids were there, even though none of the kids could come into the temple at that time. They were all too young. But I felt like it was important for them to be there because it gave us a unique opportunity to sort of talk about what was happening. And in particular, Tom is sealed to Angie, Annie's sealed to me. And to be able to have a discussion about what that looks like and what that means. My two kids are still not sealed to us. And so obviously that's something I hope happens at some point. They're both adults now. So hopefully that will come to be. But it was a unique opportunity to have some really far-reaching, like, I don't know how to describe it, far-reaching connections, spiritual, physical, familial connections. So that was really important.
Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your experience. And I just feel so blessed for the opportunity to bask in your generous spirit and be with you. We're so grateful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Courtney, how would you encourage someone to arise with Christ?
That is a great question. And I have given that quite a bit of thought. To me, the word arise is a relevant one. Arising with Christ, there's so many different approaches. It starts with a literal one for me. Arise with Christ in the morning when you open your eyes. Arise with Christ. If you do that, and I don't know what that looks like for everybody. I know what it looks like for me. If I do that, then he's with me the whole day. Before I put my feet on the floor, if I can invite Christ in my ways to guide me and be with me and walk with me, then he does. And so when I find myself in situations that are challenging or that require specific decision making, or they're frustrating, or they're happy and celebratory, I think to him first in each of those things. I want to share the joy, or the gratitude or the frustration or whatever it is. So for me, it's starting every day with the Lord, walking with him mindfully throughout the day, inviting him to participate, and thanking him for all of it, the good and the bad at the end.
We are grateful that you joined us today. We would love to hear your stories about how you arise with Jesus Christ. You can find us on Instagram at arise.with.christ or email us at arisewithchrist.temples@gmail.com.